Hi everyone, welcome to a sketchbook tour. Though I haven't finished a sketchbook in a while, this one is still my favourite. It holds all my designs, world building and notes for the character project, which was one of the units in my second year of university. For this unit we had to submit a sketchbook, walk cycle, dynamic animation and some lip sync. There were also a couple of essays and research blogs to go along with it, but they are less exciting, so we'll leave those behind. First up is the contents page that we're not going to pay any attention to. After the contents page, I get straight into my inspirations and silhouettes. I'm going to move the camera along, don't worry. I'm going to slide the sketchbook. So most of the research for this project was collected into boards on Pinterest. I was looking at solar punk and how nature and plant life could influence the architecture and clothing. The art style and general vibe of the story and world were influenced by Studio Ghibli and then Sun Creature Studios, who made The Reward and all sorts of cool short films. I'll put links to everything in the description if you want to check them out. Now, when I'm designing multiple characters and want them all to have a distinct shape, I'll start with silhouettes. I wanted my character to have a staff, so that also impacted the poses. I had to think about how they'd hold or carry the staff and the design itself. Something pointier would likely belong to a more violent or dangerous character, whereas something softer with more rounded edges could belong to someone dangerous, but they wouldn't seem that way at first. Silhouettes are a great way to really explore the shape of characters, and they might push you in a direction you wouldn't have considered otherwise. They're also great as a warm-up and just generally a lot of fun. You can also go over the top on a new layer if you're working digitally with a white brush and add in some more details once you've got the general silhouettes down. I do go into my character design process a little bit more in my How I Made This series, and I'll put a link to the exact video up here and in the description. So after the silhouettes, I'd been thinking about the story I wanted to tell and what the final character design would be like. I picked up a few of my favourite silhouettes and started doing some rough sketches and making notes, mostly to pick up points when the sketchbook was marked, but I do like to have a mix of writing and sketches because it allows me to see my thought process a couple of years on if I want to take a look back. I then added in some more inspiration from Pinterest with some floaty robes that you usually see on mage characters, because of course this was going to be fantasy based. It is my favourite genre. Now, I try to use every project I make as a way to level up something I need to improve on, but this time it was clothing and diversity within character designs. Some later projects like the story times have helped me to focus on backgrounds too, which I used to avoid any way I could. Now, most of my characters up to this point had been tall and slim, so I wanted to create a character that was a bit more beefy. In this sketch, which I really like, he has more chonky arms and he has a very square silhouette. Typically, characters designed with circles and softer edges are more friendly. Those that are squared are seen as more solid and reliable, and the ones with sharper edges tend to be more dangerous or are positioned in villain roles. Now, by this point, I was finishing around 2 pages a day. I think I once did up to 4, and as I filled out all the pages, I could really feel myself improving. It didn't matter if it was just tiny little thumbnail sketches like this or whether I was drawing from image reference. It all really helped. Drawing what I saw in my head was so much easier. As I went, I refined the character through sketches, and I'd always stuck with quite young characters, and I'd never animated a character with facial hair before, so I wanted to give that a go. This was kind of like the first proper sketch of the character that I had decided to develop. So after that, I went with some more facial expressions. I was using a regular coloured pencil. I tend to like the softer ones because you can really go lightly with it or press harder to get some darker lines. And it also makes the sketchbook look a lot more colourful rather than just having plain pencil or pen. On this page, I was really focusing on proportions and trying out different angles and placement of facial features, because in my first year and the start of second year, I was very aware that I wasn't the most consistent with the designs when I was animating, and I wanted to get the proportions of this character right. So I did a little turnaround. Now, I find these a lot more difficult when they're done traditionally rather than digitally, because if it's digital, you can just take the front pose, flip it on a new layer and erase the back, and it will be almost basically a perfect copy, and the proportions will be the same, so it's then easier to get this middle side on or 3/4 view. Traditionally, it's a little bit trickier, but if you use the guides and split up your character, you can check the proportions a little easier. Now, I wanted to use the character's robe to hide a lot of their strength and make them seem more mysterious. I also thought it would be more interesting when it came to plan the dynamic animation or the walk cycle if they had to tear off the robe and toss it aside, or suddenly stand upright if they were hunched over, to be a bit more dramatic. But I kept sketching as much as I could, and I did experiment with making the character a little younger, but I still kept the facial hair. Now, one of the things I really liked about university and working in a group setting was the feedback. We had several sessions throughout the year that got everyone together and we took a look at each other's work. So we placed our sketchbooks on the table and everyone walked around, flipped through. I ended up writing up the feedback instead of keeping the post-its because they kept falling out and it was a nightmare trying to keep them organised when I used the sketchbook so much. So some of the notes that I got were that they liked the beard and the expressions were very expressive so far, which is always good. I got asked, does the character portray a monk of some kind, which this question did help me build a little bit more on the backstory for the character. We had the silhouette is quite formless, maybe indistinct, could use body language to make the shapes stronger. A lot of people did suggest to remove the robe, which after the feedback session, I wrote up what I did next. I redesigned the character, removed the robe, created his backstory and gave him the name Oren. I then did some world building and some more outfit designs. So you might recognise these two characters from the silhouette page. These were the ones that I liked the most, and I ended up linking my original design to this character here, who is the younger version of the first sketch. So once I pushed forward with this character, I then started writing out a little bit of backstory. The sketchbook wasn't quite long enough for this, so he is very out of proportion. So just imagine from about there is correct, and then the rest is skewed a little bit. So I tried looking at some different robes because I did really like the robe. I removed the hood in a couple of them. I gave him some cool shoulder pads. We had a sort of half robe, half jacket going on, a tunic, and then a wrap along with more of a bodysuit. After that, we started to move into different areas of the project, and this was a page of mouth shapes, which was for the lip sync part of the project. Now, usually I adapt the mouth shapes depending on the character or accent. Most of them will stay the same, but if you've got a character with fangs or tusks, the shapes may be a little bit different. So it's always a good idea to do some planning beforehand if you have lip sync in your animation. We have a couple more mouth shapes. And then this page was me doing some warm-ups and doodles for the dynamic animation. I actually wanted to give magic a go because I'd never done it before, and it was on my list of goals to try animating some magic. And I'm going to show you what the final dynamic animation looked like just here. And now that I'm looking back at it, I can definitely see that I have improved a lot. It has been several years, but that still doesn't make it any less of a surprise. It's a nice surprise. I have been thinking about redoing the animation and making a comparison video, so I'll see when I can fit that in. Now, after this, I had another page of sketch, and then we moved on to this storyboard, and this was the storyboard for the walk cycle. When we were designing our walk cycles, we had an acting session where we had to demonstrate the movement we wanted to do in front of the rest of the class. I was terribly shy all throughout my schooling, so having to do workshops like this was still very embarrassing, but it did help a lot. I would recommend filming yourself and acting out your scene to really get a good reference for what you want to animate if you can. It does help a lot when there's not other people watching you and you can just really be at ease and know that you will never have to share your reference footage with someone else. Now, this is the storyboard for the dynamic animation, and this animation was actually inspired by a bow staff routine from YouTube. I did change it a little, so he twisted, and when he banged the staff on the ground, I could add in the magic. So this was the storyboards for the Lipsync project, and this part actually really made me fall in love with Lipsync, and it's so satisfying when everything matches up and the animation actually looks like it's alive. I did a couple more sketches and development work before we moved on to world building, which was one of my favourite parts. And my camera is flashing at me, so I'm gonna have to charge the battery quickly before we pick this back up. And we're back. I've tried to match things as well as I can. So on to world building. Here we have some more costume design and more character designs. These two are a warrior and a tactical advisor. I wanted the detail in the clothing to show their rank, so the more layers and decoration they had, the higher they were in the chain of command. I added in a few more notes and things along the sides just to flesh things out a bit more. Here we have two more character designs. This would be a child, and this is typically what they'd be wearing for school and lessons, so it's nice and loose, soft cloth with some wraps. And the collar is not decorated in any way, nice and plain. Then we have the archivist / historian design, and they're very symmetrical, even, nice flowing robes. They look very well-to-do and sophisticated. Now, before this project, I'd done my best to avoid backgrounds completely. I wasn't confident with perspective or colour, which is very far from how I feel now, which you can probably tell from the background updates I've been posting on the feed and the work that I've done in the later story times, which I'm still quite proud of. But this was where it started. I didn't enjoy doing these backgrounds at all, but I do now, and everyone has to start somewhere. So if there is something that you don't like to do, you might like it later. Give it a go. Do some little tests. Then we have some armor inspiration. I wanted to do some different classes of people. I was looking at Dungeons and Dragons at the time, and the barbarians, clerics, mages, that influenced this a little bit. And obviously this armor is from The Hobbit, which I think was released at the same time as well. I was a very, very big fan of that. And this is one of my favorite pages in the whole book. This is the page where I knew I had improved. I really liked the shading, and the drawing of these characters was just so fun. And it was all pretty much out of my head, which I had never been able to do before, because it was always from a reference or from life, or I had to pose to figure out what I wanted, and still it didn't really work. But this worked, and I just remember being so pleased when I made this, that I was like, this is working, I am improving, and it just felt so good. So you will get there, it will happen. And then next up, I looked at headdresses, accessories, jewelry. I don't really wear any bracelets or earrings myself, and when I design characters to animate, I always cut down on the amount of details, because as much as I love it, animation can be super tedious when you've got to include 100 tiny details on multiple characters across many, many shots. So from this, I didn't want the characters and the world to be filled with only humanoids. So As I said before, I was looking at D&D, The Hobbit, Dragon Age Inquisition had just come out at this point. I was playing a lot of that. So these designs were based on orcs and Kunari, and I just really wanted to include some horns. I took inspiration from different animals that had horns, like bulls, rams, deer, and things like that. I wanted the people to carve into the horns and add decorations and jewelry to them. And from this whole page, I really liked this design. So I turned it into a digital drawing. So this is the drawing of that sketch, much more in proportion, and I was so pleased with this one. Everything just seemed to work. I was definitely in flow state when I made this, and it took about 3 hours. I'm still quite proud of this one, which is why it gets its own page. Right, let's flip it back. It's a task and a half. Now, after I'd done the extra character sketches, I started looking at architecture and what the cities, houses, and markets would be like. I tried to sketch out some thumbnails, which I'd quite like to flesh out a bit more at some point, maybe in the comparison video when I get around to it. And then we have some more inspiration and background design. We included some more lamps and lighting. I wanted to draw a little marketplace where they'd have these very twinkly lights. And then we have some more thumbnail sketches. I imagined this to be sort of like a boardwalk, and in the trees people would live in little woven pods as their houses. This was meant to be a temple. We're getting to the end of the sketchbook now. We came to creature design, and this page, I love this page so much. I've always been super bad at drawing animals because I've mainly focused on humans and portraits at a 3/4 angle, but obviously as I improved and practiced more, this happened. This drawing is of a sun bear / synther bear, which is what I called it, and then I realized that there was already a breed of bear called a sun bear. So this little guy has a flower collar ruff around his neck that closes when he wants to take a nap. I did use a reference of a bear for this one, but I didn't follow them too closely. I remember with this one, I stretched out the mouth quite a lot wider than it did in the pictures. And to get some nice expressions in these two, I focused on the brows and the shadow around the eyes to get a tired and grumpy looking bear going on. Now, after this was this page, and I had to include a dragon-like creature because there is no proper fantasy realm without a dragon. And this baby dragon form is actually one that looks like a cross between a goat and a dragon. It has floppy ears and little horns and a long tail and what will be spikes along the spine when it gets older. So I made these sketches because I just wanted a page to sort of say what Oren got up to when he was older and went traveling. So of course he's going to help the little injured dragon goat, and I couldn't finish the sketchbook without the little dragon goat's adult form. And there he is. We even have a little Oren silhouette for scale to just show how big he is. So this is the last full page in the sketchbook. I didn't actually finish the remaining pages for this project, but I still got pretty good marks on it, and I had a lot of fun designing the world and characters. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you've got any questions, let me know, and I'll be back with more videos real soon. Bye!